What is up? Welcome into yet another edition of the Ben Garcia Show. Thank you so much for making this a part of your day, however you're watching, however you are following, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts for free, on the iHeartRadio app, or you are putting a face to the voice and you are watching us on YouTube. We appreciate that as well. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, share the Ben Garcia Show with a friend, comment, let me know why you love me, let me know why you hate me, all the usual jargon that I talk before I jump right into what we are talking about. Benstant reaction and instant reaction to Wolves and Mavs game number 3. I didn't think I would have an analysis for you guys. I pretty much just chopped this one up to a Minnesota W. There was pride on the line for the Minnesota Timberwolves. They needed to win this game, and you know, in some large spurts, the Minnesota Timberwolves just look tired. They look gassed. They look like they have no idea what they're doing. And to me, at this point, a lot of this falls on the shoulders of Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. You can blame the officials. You could blame Kyle Anderson. You could blame whoever it is that you would like to blame if you're a Minnesota Timberwolves fan. But this series has always came down to stars and superstars. The Mavericks are not going to win this series if Kyrie Irving and Luka Dončić didn't show up. And they weren't going to win this series if Luka showed up and Kyrie didn't. And they weren't going to win this series if Kyrie showed up and Luka didn't. And it's the same thing for the Minnesota Timberwolves. So with that being said, let's start here. I'll get to the Dallas Mavericks in a second. I've heaped praise on the Dallas Mavericks early and often in this series. I'm not someone that's going to toot my own horn, and I changed my prediction last show. Again, who cares about that? It's easy to pick a winner when a team goes up 2-0. Originally, I took the Wolves in 5 games, and obviously that was wrong. After one game, I had realized I had made a grave mistake because I picked against the best player in the series in Luka Dončić. I fell in love for the Anthony Edwards hype train. I watched him against my team, the Phoenix Suns, and he just demoralized them. And I just figured in this series, he'd be able to do that as well. Well, a few things really quickly. I've said this a million times, and I'll say it again. Jason Kidd deserves a lot of praise in this series. No Derek Lively for stretches. Derek Jones Jr. was out for the game in some stretches. Luka Dončić is obviously dealing with some sort of injury. I don't know how bad it is. The media likes to make it seem like it's awful, but the dude's got 30 points, so I don't know how bad it could be. But overall, the Dallas Mavericks and Jason Kidd especially are having a hell of a series. Jason Kidd is coaching circles around Chris Finch. It's not even close. I don't know if it's the Chris Finch issue with he's behind the stands and he can't do as much, but if that's the case, dude, you got to figure out a way to get in the front of things and maybe not walk up and down the sidelines, but figure out something, because what you're doing is not working. Jason Kidd has coached circles around Chris Finch, whether it's Derek Lively going out, whether it's Derek Jones Jr. going out for stretches, Luka's dealing with an injury. He has just continued to figure out this rotation masterfully ever since we had seen them go on that 6-game losing streak earlier in the season after they had gotten their new guys and Gafford and other guys into the fold whose names, PJ Washington, can't believe I forgot his name for a second. Ever since he's gotten his rotations fixed, he's just continuously tweaked it, and it has continuously coached circles around Chris Finch. The Jason Kidd career arc in terms of coaching is very interesting. Flamed out with the Bucks, came over to the Dallas Mavericks, and has just been masterful ever since he's gotten there. People like to throw coaches underneath the bus as soon as something bad goes wrong, but never heap praises on them when they do indeed deserve it. Now I want to talk a little bit about the stars and the superstars in this series. And I've said it before, and I've said it millions of times, and I said it earlier in this rant. But the Minnesota Timberwolves were never going to win this series if their stars and superstars didn't show up. Karl-Anthony Towns has been abysmal. He's been really bad. And I can name him as the number one person to blame, but Karl-Anthony Towns is not the best player on this team. I was one of those people who labeled Anthony Edwards the future face of the NBA. I was one of those people that labeled Anthony Edwards the future face of the NBA, a superstar, the best shooting guard in the league. And I think myself and everyone else realized we were a bit too premature. This is not me ragging on Anthony Edwards and saying he's just god-awful and we were all wrong and this guy can't be amazing. But it just turns out we were all a little early for this Anthony Edwards hype train. Is he a superstar? I thought he was. But maybe he's still in that star tier. A superstar is someone that could just go nuclear and lift your team in situations where they really need it. And Anthony Edwards, for 6 straight games now, has been really bad. He hasn't had a single game in which he shot over 47%. He hasn't had a single three-point shooting game where he shot, really decently at all. In his last 6 games, it's been 5 for 15, 8 for 17, 6 for 24, 6 for 16, 5 for 17, 10 for 23. And in three-pointers, it's even worse. 1 for 5, 4 for 9, 2 for 10, 5 for 12, 2 for 7, and 0 three-pointers made out of 2. His splits this series in the last 6 games overall, Anthony Edwards splits 35, 31, 86. That's awful. Anthony Edwards in this series and in the last 6 games is shooting 35% from the field, 31% from 3, and 86% from free throw, which is fine, but it's obviously it's very good, but it's the splits that matter. So in this series, shooting 35, 31, 86. As one of those people that were on the Anthony Edwards hype train and was one of those people who were jumping on board and labeling him a superstar and labeling him the next face of the NBA, all that stuff might be true, but it's clearly not true now. It's important in this business, the old phrase and saying of Colin Cowherd, don't worry about being right, get it right. And Anthony Edwards is clearly not a superstar right now. He's a high-level star player. In spurts can play really, really well. If you remember correctly, we saw this with Devin Booker last year. 6, 7 straight games went nuclear, was getting Michael Jordan comps, but then came crashing back down to earth in Game 6 and Game 7 in the Nuggets series and ultimately getting eliminated. People like myself who labeled Anthony Edwards a superstar, the next face of the NBA, and some people even giving him comps to Michael Jordan, we need to take a step back. We were all clearly wrong for now. It doesn't mean he won't get there at some point, but when you shoot 35% from the field, 31% from 3, in this series, in the last 6 games alone, you can't take the label of superstar because superstar is reserved for the Luka Dončićs, for the Nikola Jokic's of the world, the Giannis Antetokounmpos of the world, people who, when it doesn't matter if your team needs something, they get it figured out. Always and forever. Again, this isn't Anthony Edwards hate. It doesn't mean he won't get there one day. He's 22 years old. I'm not here just ragging on Anthony Edwards. But it's important to get it right and revise what we all thought Anthony Edwards once was. It doesn't mean he won't get there. And it doesn't mean he wasn't really impressive in the Sun series and really impressive for about half of the Denver Nuggets series. But when you shoot 35% from the field and 31% from 3 in your last 6 games, people like myself who labeled him the face of the NBA and labeled him a superstar, we have to come back on that. And we have to realize and correct that we were wrong. Because Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns are the reason why they're losing this series. Every single one of these games are close. If either one of these guys step up in some way, then they win this series. And they potentially are up 3-0 in this series. But Anthony Edwards has not shot well and at times looks gassed. There was a report that he had to get an oxygen mask in Game 2. This is a 22-year-old whose conditioning clearly isn't there. And we all made fun of Luka Dončić for being the guy who's not conditioned, and it turns out it's more so Anthony Edwards because he just hasn't been in this moment before. So this series is going squarely on the shoulders of Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, plain and simple. I've heaped all the praise for the Dallas Mavericks. I've been on the Luka train for years. This guy's a superstar. He could possibly be the face of the NBA. He's potentially the best player in the NBA if he wins the NBA Finals. I could talk all those things. I could talk the Kyrie Irving renaissance. But even after all those Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving games and the Dallas Mavericks going after the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first 3 games, if Karl Anthony Towns and if Anthony Edwards just play to 80% of their capabilities, they win potentially all 3 of these games, and they definitely win this series. But Anthony Edwards, it is clear, is just not ready for this moment. It doesn't mean he won't get there. He's 22 years old, and I'm sure this will motivate him for next year. But it is clear right now, he's not the face of the NBA. That's for darn sure. He's probably not a superstar right now. I've seen what he can do for stretches, but you have to do that stuff consistently to be a superstar. It's been my issue with Jason Tatum. He's the most inconsistent player that gets labeled a superstar in the NBA. And you have to have those characteristics if you're Anthony Edwards. We're not going to grade players on a curve just because they jump high and dunk hard. That's not fair to everyone else, and I won't do it. The Dallas Mavericks are going to win this series. They're going to play the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. I'll talk more about that when that stuff is official. But if you want my early NBA Finals prediction, the Dallas Mavericks are going to win that series in 6 games. It's been an awesome Western Conference Finals for the 3 games that it's been. I wish it could have been longer. Maybe the Timberwolves squeeze out a W on Tuesday. Doesn't really look like it at this point. But the Dallas Mavericks, it's unofficial, but it's kind of official, are going to the NBA Finals.